So next in our kind of like journey to old age here, we're going to talk about shading our little like nasal labial folds and our nose and a little bit about the mouth. And then we're going to move on to like the jowls and chin, and then also our neck and collarbones just a little bit. So at this point, obviously, I'm like half old, not all the way there, and I kind of have like my trendy contour, so we kind of have to like pull the rest of it into where it needs to be. So for this, I'm going to go back to kind of using my brush, and again, I'm using like a million different colors here, because that's how I do things. So for this area, you have to be really careful because sometimes they look really, really fake. So I'll usually have people smile and kind of see how they naturally go, and I try to follow it when they're smiling, and then I'll like relax it, just because sometimes if you do it too exact to how they actually look, it just doesn't look right at rest. And that's one thing you have to think about, is that like my face might wrinkle in certain ways, but when it's at rest it could look a little bit strange. So I'll usually kind of leave it like this first, and then I'll blend it and kind of see how where I'm at. And then usually you want to go in, so this is an area that in corrective makeup we highlight this a lot, so I'm actually going to come in and I really want to like shade this, and then that'll end up kind of like caving everything in. So with the lips, it's really common to add like lines around it. So you can do that with cream makeup, you can do that with a pencil. I think pencils are a little bit easier, so that's probably going to be like one of my last things I'll do, or at least after all this, just so it doesn't like smear around a lot. But you can add in like smile lines and things. So if I smile again, I can kind of follow, like I have dimples, so I could like add in these lines if I wanted to. You just have to be really careful, because sometimes it just looks like too fake and too much, and then sometimes too like your cheek shading, if it meets with that, it can look really off. So for now, we're gonna see kind of how this goes for us. It might not be great, but that's the thing with old age makeup, sometimes you don't know until you do it. So it's just gotta remember it's all makeup, and it can always be removed. And then one thing you're probably also going to notice the more that you watch these videos or that you're in class with me is that I have a tendency to like mumble as I do makeup, and I do that when I do makeup on other people too, and it really, it's the strangest thing, so I apologize for doing that if I get a little mumbly and weird. I'm very aware that I do it, and it's just a habit that I can't tell you where it came from because I'm not sure. So if I want, I can add in a couple other smile lines. Again, you just want to be careful because this is the area where I feel like it gets very fake very easily. So always think about like probably like less is more when you're going, especially for the really strongly theatrical stuff. If it was something that was going to look a little bit more natural, I can think sometimes you can get away with doing a little bit more, or if you're going to do like latex wrinkles or something over it. But if you're trying to do something this like extreme and theatrical, the more lines and things you have all over your face, the more like your highlights and shadows just all kind of blend and blur together, and it doesn't really help you or like emphasize the age very much. So I think this line's actually going to end up being pretty good for us, so we'll go ahead and emphasize that. And so that's the thing, it's like I've done my own makeup a million times and I still feel like I have no idea what I'm doing every time I sit down to do this, so don't feel bad if that's you. And then usually, so for the chin, you can do things like if you can emphasize like in here if you want to, you can kind of round the chin out. That's what I typically do, is I like to kind of do one of these. So that's why like I really like feel like I combine the sunken and round old age when I do things. But you can just choose one, but I kind of feel like I do a little bit of everything. I always do my chin crooked too. I don't, you know, I'm looking straight at myself and it's always a mess. And so I usually will shade just a little in here, and then I think it's kind of fun to emphasize this on people. So you kind of, with like old age makeup, you can sort of like, yeah, it's like it's just like the opposite of corrective, like I said. You can just like emphasize all the things that people always tell you to cover up, and this, it's kind of like encouraged here, so I think it's kind of fun to kind of play with like shadows, because really we're just trying to make like new shadows and patterns on our faces to kind of like trick the eye and like trick the audience and stuff into thinking that we're someone that we're not. So you can kind of play with all these things that we're usually not encouraged to do. Okay, so now that we kind of have that area, that whole thing is like really like tripping me up the way that I did that. It's gross. I hope I don't actually age like this. I'm gonna talk about my nose. So the nose is one of the things that I always feel like less is more unless you are trying to do more, if that makes sense. So if you are trying to give your character like a really dramatic crooked nose, then you have to like commit and do that. But if you're just trying to kind of like make it fit in with everything else, because like right now, and if you think in general, people's noses don't necessarily age, but a lot of times in these kinds of like intense character makeups, you can have like a crooked nose or something, or like emphasize a bump. But if you just leave it like this, it's like I have this really brightly colored nose and the rest of my face is very heavily like made up and shadowed, and this just looks like normal. So if anything, I would contour it like you normally do. I usually like to change the shape a little bit. It is really tricky, I feel like, to do that and have it look not super theatrical and way too much, so we'll see how I do. But generally the first thing I do is I just kind of try to like trace down the side of it like I would if I was like contouring normally. We'll go ahead and do both sides just so that there's maybe a hope that it'll look normal. And then, so if I want to, normally what I do is I kind of cut this because I feel like my nose is a little bit big on the end, and I shade there, but I don't necessarily have to do that for age if I don't want to, but I want to emphasize these lines, and then you want to emphasize kind of underneath the nose as well. So be careful. I would recommend maybe to use a different brush around your eyes than you use around your nose, just so that you're not like cross-contaminating, and same with like lips. Especially if I was working on someone else, I would definitely be using different brushes. But I'm working on myself and I just thought of it now, so I'm not doing that. But it's definitely better and a little bit more sanitary if we don't cross-contaminate like the eye area with the nose area and the lip area. So again, we'll just kind of come in, and this will look a little funny because I don't have, as I get way too bright, I swear maybe at some point I'll understand how lighting works, but obviously we are not there yet. So we can sit here and we'll try to do this, and if I want to kind of shade in, and so normally the sides of my nose, I highlight these a lot in my regular makeup, so usually with age I find myself shading them a little bit more. And so we can try to kind of emphasize my shading a little differently than what I normally do. I don't know, we can kind of make it look a little bit like it comes in a little bit more and it's a little bit more crooked. I don't know, if it's a really dramatic character makeup, sometimes I will like, I've like shaded somebody's nose like completely in half like that so it looks super crooked. But I think for this, I'm just gonna emphasize the bones that I kind of naturally have. I don't have like a huge bump or anything in my nose, but I'm just gonna kind of play up what is naturally there. And definitely we're gonna work on this area because it's super weird that it all just like connects. That's the thing, it's like sometimes you spend so much time doing one part of your face, but then once you get to another part, you hate how that looks compared with everything else. That's why I feel like you can't spend too much time on any one detail, just because half the time we end up changing it as we do our makeup anyway. Okay, so I think that'll work kind of for our purposes. And so far as like blending these areas out, since it's kind of smaller like the eye, I'm going to come in with a brush, and with the nose I usually just kind of pull it down the sides, just like I would in corrective makeup, and then I can do that. And again, if this was someone who wasn't me, or if I would have thought about it before I was doing it right now, different brushes for these parts of my face, just because you really don't want to cross-contaminate nose, eyes, and lips. And so again, to blend, usually shadows we're blending up, and then I just find myself doing a lot of like back and forth kind of motions as well, so we can really like emphasize this chin. I swear to you, I don't think I've ever not made my chin crooked when I've done old age makeup. I don't know what it is that always compels me to do that, but somehow every single time it has ended up a little bit crooked. And then for this spot, we can kind of do the same thing. So I'm pulling it up and onto my cheek, but then I'm also kind of like trying to preserve the line. So I like to like move it back and forth and then like slightly blend it up. So with this one, I'm like moving it back and forth and moving it back and forth, but then I can also kind of blend it. So not necessarily, so this one is going to go more out than it would up, but it's going like it's blending away from the highlight, and the highlight blends away from the shadow. That's probably like the easiest way to think about it. And so again, we'll come in and do this. I think we're pretty good. I think that that doesn't meet my cheek shadow too much. Again, I kind of did like the little combo of both kind of round and sunken, so it's a little bit different than if I was just sticking to one, but you can see I've definitely kind of emphasized that far more than it is on the other side of my face. So now we just kind of have to put all of our highlights in and blend everything out, and then we'll be done with this part. So again, I just want to put my highlight, and on the nose, on this area, it's on either side of it. I think that can get a little bit confusing. And then on the bridge of the nose, remember anywhere you put this highlight on the nose is really going to emphasize it. So if you put a ton right here, it's going to make it look a lot larger. So just always be kind of mindful of that. And then I'm going to come in right under this one and add in my highlight, add in my highlight. And then I can come in under here as well. And that's gonna help. Obviously it's not blended, so it looks a little crazy, a little bit off, but we can kind of go in and we'll blend all this again. And I switched back to a sponge, just because it's what I had, so you'll see I am definitely kind of all over the place when I am doing this a lot of the time. So that's why it's like you can use brushes, you can use sponges, you can kind of use whatever it is that is most comfortable for you. And again, I'm going to blend my highlight away from the shadow. And I'll definitely have to go in and kind of touch that up a little bit more when I'm closer to my face. But you can kind of see the general idea of where we're going from here. And definitely if we go from like this side to this side looks way smoother and a lot less like wrinkled and sagging than this side of my face does. So I'm going to go in, clean this up a little bit more, and then we're going to talk about the jawline and the neck.